Okay, so birth certificate gets you a social security number. So it's interesting because you've also you've done a lot of different approaches to creating synthetic people.
Right.
There's homeless people involved, so sometimes it's grounded in real people or real names, and then you're
Right.
like some part is fake, some part is real sometimes, and sometimes it's completely all fake.
Right. Because now I have the name, I have the social security number. And what's great is they mail you. What's even better is you get to pick whatever name you want,
Hmm.
because when you pick your child's name, he doesn't even have to have your last name.
Hmm.
You pick any name. So I would pick a name and I'd just say, oh, my wife's last name is this. If they questioned it, which they never did. But, I've got a social security number, and then I would go apply for credit cards. And I'd get denied, of course. But they would all offer me a secured credit card. So I'd then fill out the secured credit card and I'd send the bank the money, and they would give me a secured credit card for $500, $300, 1,000, whatever it was. And then once you start making the payments, I pulled the credit, and a credit profile shows up saying that this 31-year-old man with a social security number that I know was issued, a couple months ago, has three credit cards. They don't even say secured. They just say there's like, this credit card is $500. It was issued by Bank of America. This one was issued by Capital One. This one was, so I've got three of them, but I had no credit scores. So at that point, I kind of kicked back and waited. I just kept making payments. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll bet you that the credit bureaus don't generate credit scores for at least a year. And I was like, God, this is going to be a year-long process. And while that was happening, I was starting other ones, because I figured at least in a year I'll have a bunch of these we call them like phantom borrowers, but now they call them synthetic identities. So at least I would have these synthetic identities, and maybe I could do something with them. But what happened was, at 6 months, I went and I randomly pulled the guy's credit, the person's credit, and they had 705 credit scores, 705, 701, 695. I was like, oh my God, you only needed a 620 to get a 95% loan from the bank. So I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Sure enough, a month later, the other ones I had started, all of them, bam, bam, bam.
Hmm. So what do you do with a phantom borrower? Like what? How do you make money on this?
So I think most people, if you were just like a scammer or a fraudster, you would probably just get credit cards and maybe build up that history, or maybe try and borrow a personal loan, which is limited. It's personal loans are you could go to an FDIC insured bank which borrows money. Those, the personal loans they lend out at the max $15,000. So you could do that.
So you can go through this whole process of creating a fake identity, getting a card, paying it off, building up credit, and then you get $15,000 at the end, or
Right.
some.
You get 15, maybe, if you want to keep making the payments, if you could wait a year, you could probably get 15,000. Maybe you could get 20, 30,000, and a bunch of little smaller ones. You get 7,500, because there was $7,500 from Citibank, $5,500 from American General. So you maybe get what, 25,000, maybe 30,000 in personal loans. Maybe you could then apply for, maybe get another 20 or 30,000 in regular credit cards, 10,000 here, 8,000, 5,000. And then you go to the lower department store cards, and you go to Home Depot, you get 1,000, you get 500. So it ends up being, maybe you can get 50, 60,000. Maybe if you're really good, you could get up to 80 or $100,000 in credit cards and personal loans, if you really knew what you were doing. But
Per person, per identity.
per identity. But I had the ability to leverage those perfect credit profiles against properties. And I mean, ultimately, that's what I end up doing. And so each one of those identities was worth, a few million.
Can you explain how that works? So to leverage them against property. So how does that work with a mortgage?
So what I did
Yeah.
eventually,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was is down the road, but, I mean, at this point, when things are just, my whole life had kind of gone off the rails, I was on federal probation. And so what I decided I was going to do was start running a scam, a much larger scam. And what I was going to do was I was going to start flipping properties, right? Like buy houses cheap, fix them up and sell them.
Mhm.
There's an area of Tampa called Ybor City. So I was going to start flipping houses in Ybor City. And, I thought, okay, I can buy these houses for, you could buy a really crappy house at that time for $50,000, $60,000. Let's say 50. And then you could put $25,000 into it in renovations. You could renovate it for 25, and maybe you could get an appraisal for 100.
Mhm.
So I thought what I could do is I can I can buy these houses, renovate them and sell them to, regular people. But I also had been working on the synthetic identities. And then I thought, well, or I could just sell them to synthetic identities. And then I wouldn't have to dump 25,000 into it, right? And these guys are perfect. They have perfect credit. I can provide W-2s and pay stubs because by this point, I'm manufacturing businesses. So I've incorporated businesses. I've got websites for the businesses, W-2s, pay stubs. So these guys look perfect. So I figure I'll buy these properties for 50,000, sell it to these guys for 100. Maybe I'll pocket 40 or 50,000. I don't really have to do anything. But that seems short-sighted. So I thought what'd be even better is that if I did a little bit of renovations and then I sold it for much higher, maybe I put 10,000, clean up the outside of it, because these guys don't care what the inside of the property looks like. They don't exist. So, and then but I can't, how am I going to get an appraisal for $100,000? Well, do you know how appraisals work? Okay. So the bank sends an appraiser out, or at that time you could provide an appraisal. They can review it. So they'll do what's called a desktop review. They review it. They review it um, on the computer. They never go out to the property, or they send someone out. They call that, it's like a field review. They send someone out and they just look at the house. They don't go in it though. So I have to clean up the outside of the house. So what I did was, but the problem is if you're trying to sell that house for, let's say 200,000, the other houses, they have to pick 3 comparable sales in the area that are also going to support a $200,000 sales price. Well, there's no other houses selling for 200,000 near this house. So I thought, if I want to get these things appraised for 200, 250,000, I have to have comparable sales. And that appraisal is going to be reviewed. So what I did was I went out and I bought this house for 50,000, and I recorded the sale at 200,000. So when you buy a house for $100,000, you pay $700 in doc stamps. But if you pay an extra $700, the sale shows up for 200,000. Well, I'm buying these things for 50, so I'm paying $350, and I'm just paying an extra $1,050. So it ends up being $1,400, but the sale shows up at 200,000 on a house that's a crack house I bought for $50,000. Now I trim the trees, we mow the yard, we clean up the porch, we put the porch rail on, maybe we paint it real nice, we black out all the windows. You can't see inside, but from the curb it looks great. And I get an appraisal. So I do that with that house. I do that with another house, all within a mile. So I buy 4 houses, knowing I could use there's a subject and 3 comparables for all of them. So the first thing I did is I bought 4 houses for 50,000, 60,000, 40,000, and I recorded the values at 210, 200, 190. So I get an appraiser to come out there. He appraises it. He says it's horrible, but there's comparables here. Now, of course, it is in bad shape, and he says it's in bad shape, but I go ahead and I correct all that. So I correct it. So now if you review the appraisal and you're in California, or even if you drive your car down, the appraiser comes to the house and looks at it from the street, it looks fine. But the truth is, I've got $60,000 into this property and you're appraising it for 200,000. So the bank's they're not going to lend 200, but they'll lend 190. So the bank is ready to lend this synthetic borrower $190,000 on a house that I have 60,000 in. So I schedule a closing and we close on the house and I walk away with $60,000. And the thing is, like, the problem is by the time I got to this point, I knew so many people in the industry. Nobody had to really at that point show up. Although I've had people show up for the synthetic identities and sign for them. Almost all the closings, nobody ever showed up. I just showed up and said to the title agency and said, "Hey, my borrower, he's at work right now. He can't make it. Can I just take the file and I'll have him sign all the documents at his work and I'll bring him back. He's like an hour and a half away from here. I'll be back in 2 or 3 hours." And they're like, "Oh, wow. Man, Matt, thank you so much." And they would give it to me and I'd go sit in the parking lot and I'd sign all the documents. I'd wait an hour or two and I'd come back in and say, "Here you go."
How were you able to keep all of this in your mind? Because you have to not slip up in any of these conversations.
It's pretty easy for me to keep them everything in the correct category. Does that make sense? Like it's I'm not great at a lot of things, but this I was very good at.
But there's these phantom people that exist, and they were becoming real people in your mind. Isn't like you're able to tell good stories with those people, right? Like, because if you're talking to the appraiser, if you're talking to everybody involved.
Well, keep in mind the appraiser almost never meets the borrower. Never, not even almost, like 99.9999% of the time, they never meet them.
But you have to talk about them.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking is you're able to converse fluently about these synthetic identities.
Yeah, they all had different jobs. They all had, all the jobs were basically, they were all on the job for 5 years. They were all, it was, a lot of it was.
There's a template.
Yeah, exactly. But.
I got it.
Listen, matter of fact, almost every one of them had the same birth date, So, because who knows? It wasn't difficult. And keep in mind, a lot of the brokers barely ever meet the borrower. They call in on the phone, but it didn't matter anyway, because I'm walking in saying, "I got a slam dunk deal for you." Mm-hmm. And they're like, "Oh, wow, Matt, you got the W-2s, the pay stubs, you got all their rental history. You have everything done. It's perfect. Thank you so much." They're happy to do it. "Hey, I print up the docs and I'll have them go sign it." "Great. Wow. Thank you." Assuming they didn't already know about it. And almost everybody involved in this, by the time I was done, was involved. There was probably 15 or 20 people that all knew what was going on.
The full of it. They knew the full depth of it.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe not 100% everything, but they definitely knew this is fraud.
And they were still going along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep in mind that even when, I give you an example. One of my, let's say, and this happened with almost all of them, was he would buy 5 houses. So the guy bought, what happens, the basic design was, I buy the houses, I record the values higher, and this person buys all 5 houses, refinances them. He ends up borrowing a little bit over $1 million in his name. Then, of course, I go and I get personal loans from several banks. I get credit cards. I run up all of his credit cards. By this point, I've got $10,000, $20,000 worth of credit cards in the guy's name. So the guys are all worth like $1 million and change. Well, once I stop paying, you start getting letters from the collection companies, right? From the banks, and then they sell them off. So after about 3 months, you're getting tons of letters. And what I would do is I would take my borrower's name, I would go online and I would find, or I'd go in the newspaper and I would find an article about, let's say, like a 12-car pileup. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge accident on I-4. It's very dangerous. So there's a 12-car pileup, and someone in the accident was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital. Mm-hmm. I would cut and paste that article, and I would just insert my borrower's name into the article saying that, Brandon Green was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital, is currently in critical condition. I would then print that article out on newsprint. I'd then cut it up, make a copy of the newsprint, highlight his name, and I would write a letter from Brandon Green's fictional sister to the collection companies saying, several months ago, my brother was in a horrible car accident. He is currently, they've got the article, they have the highlighted name. He clearly was in this accident. He is currently in a coma, and the doctors say even if he wakes up from the coma, he will never work again. That, so you might as well just foreclose on, stop writing us letters and take the houses back. And that's all they're looking for is a reason. At this point, even if they look into Brandon Green, they can't figure out if he's a real person or not. Because he's got a social security number. And everything went bad at the same time. He's got multiple rental properties or his primary residence. All of his credit cards went bad. Everything went bad. We have an excuse. We have a letter. That happens. People get divorced. They lose their job. They get in accidents. It's reasonable.
When they look into it, it all looks legitimate.
Even if they ordered another appraisal. By this point, it's not 4 comparable sales or 3 or 4 comparable sales. By this point, it's like 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, because I kept making more and more of these guys.
What was your, almost like a tangent, what's your thinking process? There's a lot of cleverness going on here. So like the car pileup as a solution, a newspaper, and you mail it. Are you sitting there alone and thinking through this? Like, how do you come up with that idea? It's a very interesting, a very clever, innovative idea.
So at first I thought about making like a fake death certificate. Mm-hmm. He died, but I thought, I don't know, like what if, like some of these places had like, primary mortgage insurance. Like what if the primary mortgage insurance, like what if they try and claim because he was dead, or like, I don't know that side. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to do something that's semi-verifiable and third parties, like a third party telling you this is what happened. I thought, well, like the newspaper, and, or do I claim bankruptcy? And I've done that. I've gone and got the bankruptcy forms, right? You can go to the bankruptcy court and they'll give you forms to mail to all of your creditors, and you mail them. They stop contacting you. They wait to be located by or notified by the bankruptcy court. But my fear there is, nobody's ever going to notify them. Like I'm not going through bankruptcy for one of these guys. So it was like, this is a better bet than just writing a letter saying, I'm going through a divorce. My wife's keeping those houses. That's her problem. There's lots of things you could do, but to me, this was, they're not going to try. How do you shut it down without him dying? How do you shut that down? This is how you shut it down. He's in a coma. He'll never work again. He was in a car accident. Here's the proof. He can't even write you, I'm his sister. I wrote you the letter.
It's a one-time letter that seems to tie up all the
exactly.
ends.
Exactly. I don't know exactly how that, what sparked that is, as much as there were so many other avenues that I could have gone that I just didn't know.
But you were thinking through all those different avenues.
Yeah.
Are you mostly thinking alone?
I mean, I had guys that I was bouncing ideas off of. There were other guys that were involved in the scam. Everybody, I think that scam ended up making like, I think the FBI said, it was like 11.5 million or something. And but there were so many other people that were involved in that scam that were, this guy's getting 50, this guy's getting 20, 17,000, 20,000, 25,000. And, we're just doing it constantly. And so the bank would foreclose on that property. They'd take it back. They'd put it back on the MLS. They put it back on the MLS for 200,000. It wouldn't sell. Then they drop it to, 150, wouldn't sell. Then they drop it to 125, 130, wouldn't sell. They drop it to 90, and somebody buy it for like 90. It wasn't worth 90. But by that point, that whole area we'd done so many houses at that point, the whole area shot up. And the FBI said we did 109 houses. I don't think that's true. But
wow.
we when I end up leaving Tampa after that scam falls apart and the FBI shows up, Forbes came out with an article, 6 months later, and they said that the Ybor City zip code was one of the top 20 fastest growing appraising areas in the country. Mm-hmm. And, everybody was like, oh, that's mad because this place is a dump. Like this is a horrible place. Like this is, and I remember one time I had talked to a guy, years later, and he was like, oh, all the comparable sales have dried up. Like when you left, there was just nothing even close to 200,000.